Hello everyone, welcome to Empower 305. This is episode 1 of the City of Miami's first ever podcast. And we're excited to bring this to you because we plan on discussing and hopefully educating listeners on the ins and outs of local government and break down how you can use government as a resource so that you not only survive, but you thrive in the 305 using all of the benefits available to you in the Magic City. I'm your host, David Janot of the City of Miami's Office of Communications, and I'm pleased today to announce that I'm joined by our very first guest on Empower 305, City of Miami City Manager, Art Noriega. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. This is a kind of a really unique and sort of groundbreaking opportunity for all of us. We're either, as we were talking before, we're either going to set the bar really high or we're going to set the bar really low, and hopefully everybody sort of picks up the slack for us afterwards. But we hope this is really going to be an opportunity to be provide a sort of that informational gap that we have, especially to the public. And hopefully we do a few of these, not just with me, obviously, but a lot of our other leadership team at the city. That way, the general public, our constituents, our residents, our business owners get a chance to kind of peel back the onion a little bit on what we do at the city and all the really good things that they may not hear about on a regular basis. So.
But when you first started, your first major test as the city manager nearly 2 years ago was getting Miami through a global pandemic. Our mayor was even one of the first ones in our community to get COVID. What was that like for you?
Well, that's hard to even describe sometimes, because I tell people, you come into a job, especially, right out of the gate, and you have these plans, sort of the strategy that you kind of know where you're going to be or where you want to be the first 3 months, the next 6 months. And then I'm 2 weeks on the job and the mayor tests positive. So that immediately transitioned to now we're really dealing with this issue firsthand, right? And then I have to quarantine. So I'm now managing the city in isolation, because we really knew very little about the virus at that point. It was so early, so we're being very, very cautious in terms of how we interact with each other, and it was one of those moments that you really get a sense of how prepared you are for something, for a job, and you always have this little bit of doubt that sort of sits in the back of your head whether you're going to be capable of doing what it takes. It's a credit to the fact that we have incredible people that work for the city, and we had some very good leadership, especially amongst our municipal leaders, and everybody really did their absolute best to work together. I don't wish it on anybody. I don't want to have to go through it again. I had enough with that experience. But it was, to me, something that actually forged some very good relationships for me too, right out of the gate, because there's no better way to sort of build chemistry than step right into a crisis.
Right.
So it definitely was and has been an amazing experience for me. And I got to tell you, as bad as it was, I really have taken from it as much as I can, most of the positive, from it, which is it really forged us into a city kind of all working in one direction. We weren't disjointed, even in our emergency operations center, especially those first few months. You really appreciate, how well prepared we were for it, because we've dealt with natural disasters as a city, and a lot of that translated. And so I got to give a lot of credit to our leadership. They did a phenomenal job. So.
And speaking of that leadership, how challenging is it for you to not only have that legislative body that you have to report to, but the residents, the stakeholders, as well as the nearly 4,000 employee workforce to lead? I mean, that sounds like a balancing act with all of that.
It is, and that's probably the hardest part of the job, is that balancing act, because the residents elect our elected officials. And for the most part, how they experience or how they connect to the city is very limited, right? What they care about is my garbage getting picked up? Can I walk down the street safely? Is my park clean where I take my kids? They're really embedded in the very frontline quality of life issues. Business owners, they're a huge stakeholder too, right? They're the economic engine that drives a lot of the success and economic health of the city. and they have a different set of issues that they're concerned with, right? Especially during COVID, we saw that sort of firsthand, obviously because they were, significantly impacted. And then you have elected officials who are trying to also respond to both constituencies, right? Their residents, their business owners, and they have to manage that balance. And all five of them see that prism differently, right? So that's kind of the hardest part is, you have a small group, which is that's actually the beneficial part. I'm not dealing with 12 commissioners or 13 commissioners. I'm dealing with 5, right? And a mayor who definitely has very strong opinions on a lot of the critical issues that we're dealing with. The hardest part is getting them all to a point where we can at least count 3, right? Get to that majority. We got an issue, we got a legislation that has to get passed. That ultimately is the most difficult part, and then balance that against a lot of the public feedback we get at meetings, and outside of meetings, because there are very specific issues that really touch a nerve with people. Public safety is a big one. Resiliency is also another one. Housing, the affordability of what it costs to live in the city and do business in the city is also a major issue. So we're dealing with all of those big city issues, right? Those very sort of forward-leaning ideas and issues that are going to be front and center for us for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And the average lifespan of a city manager, you don't get a chance to see a lot of what you put in place come to fruition. So my goal, and I know that, is to sort of get as much of a foundation built on some of the key things that we're working on, and hope that the person that comes behind me or the elected body that moves in beyond us, after term limits or through the election cycle, shares that same vision, because that's how you carry on the long-term legacy projects, because they take a while. Resiliency is a key one. Those are 20, 30, 40-year plans. So for me, that balance is probably the hardest part, but we've navigated it pretty well in the 19, 20 months I've been on the job. So.
For sure. Now, you touched on some of the things I wanted to get to. Some positives, crime is down, so that's a win for public safety right there. And in terms of resilience, the eyes of the world are on Miami right now, and as we record this, Mayor Suarez is off in Glasgow at COP26, telling people about our hashtag Miami Forever, what our plans are, and hopefully he's learning some new things to bring back. But what is your vision for some of the city services, jobs, housing, as you mentioned, and how do you hope that vision empowers some of our residents? And specifically, what is your vision for our police department?
So let me start with police, because that's sort of the most recent, we'll call it, hot button issue, because it's been obviously very public in the last few weeks. We have a police department that has really evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. I would consider the way we have handled our policing, our public safety, exemplary. It really has. I mean, and a very clear example of that, when we had the riots summer before last and all the protests, Miami came through all of that in relatively good order, because we had already established some very deep-rooted relationships in the community. We understood how impacted they were, and the police was able to sort of tap those resources, tap those relationships, work closely with those that felt impacted by that. And as a result, we didn't have some of the incidents that you had in the Pacific Northwest or in other big cities. Right. Even Tampa, was closest sort of Florida city that had some major issues in terms of their reaction and interaction during that kind of very difficult time. So, our police department is, in its core and in its foundation, very well rooted and does an exceptional job. But leadership matters, right? And so, for me, and I had a really long conversation with the executive ranks at the police department, and I said, everyone here has an opportunity to build the next legacy for that department, right? In terms of how it's led. And law enforcement, public safety has and will continue to change and evolve over time, because the issues change, and what works in terms of policing changes, right? And they're all very astute. They appreciate all of that. But what they also realize is that what's most important is doing the work, right? It's not talking about doing the work. And and I'm sort of a big believer in this. This is a personal philosophy. I'm not a talker, I'm a doer, right? So I don't really like talking about all the things that I'm gonna do. I like doing them and then letting people know, hey, look, we did this, we did that, because I think that has more traction to everyone in terms of what is important to them. So police, I think, has been headed in the right direction. It was unfortunate that we had to make a change with the police chief. I knew that change had to come quickly. I knew it couldn't linger any longer than the time it had, because the morale in the department was being impacted. So we made that change. It was difficult. It's the hardest part of the job. Personnel is the most vital resource the city has. And there is no harder job than having to look somebody in the eye and saying, hey, look, this is not working out. Right? It's in any relationship, whether it's personal or professional. It's the hardest thing we do as human beings, because I have feelings. I have emotions too. I always put myself in the shoes of the individual that I'm communicating with, right? And I know that chief has a wife, he has a child. He uprooted and moved, to Miami, and I know how difficult that is. But there's a higher purpose, right? And in spite of all of those, concerns, what was most important is getting that department with the right leadership and the right leader, and keeping it healthy, keeping it moving in the right direction, and certainly the change was necessary. But there's always, for me, a compassionate side, and part of it that really kind of resonates for me and is difficult for me is the fact that both parties to that conversation are human, and you can't disconnect from that. As far as everything else we're kind of working on in the city, I mean, the mayor does a really good job, right, of presenting sort of his priorities, and his priorities are spot on, right? It's how do we make the city as affordable as possible to draw as much talent here, and create an economic environment where that talent can then thrive, because we have the right jobs in place and available to people. And there are a whole series of circular factors that work into that, right? I mean, it's cost of living, it's housing, it's job opportunities, it's training. All of these things have to be in place to truly sort of meet some of those, economic goals and a lot of those initiatives. And we are starting to build the foundation for that. Most of what's happened in the city in the past has happened organically. The city's grown because it has a lot of intangible benefits, right? Geography, weather, cost of living, it's cultural sort of base, right? Its connections to the Caribbean and South America, as a natural sort of route for that. And so, as a city, we have all these organic factors that work in our favor, but we've never really done enough to sort of create a strategy behind that and really be proactive, right? And I think that's what we're starting to work on now. And all of those things that I just mentioned are really important to that. The other piece of it is he talks a lot about, and is they're not priorities 1 and 2. They're 1A, 1B. They're all sort of at the same level as resiliency, because resiliency not only has the obvious impact, which is it's a general alarm, that's a very loud alarm that's being rung about what our coastline is going to look like and what this city is going to look like in the next half century in terms of climate change. But all those factors that impact that, right? Because those individuals, when you talk about resiliency, the individuals that get impacted the worst and the most and upfront are those with less means, right? Because they don't have the resources to make themselves resilient, right? So you have to work in a plan that not only deals with protecting sea level rise, protecting against natural disasters, but you also have to put in place the resiliency to make sure you have the economic resiliency for individuals, those that don't necessarily have the means to sort of manage that. And that's housing, that's jobs, that's all the things that are important behind that too. So as a city, if we can really come at housing and both environmental and economic resiliency, I think we will be a global example, and a city with, as fast as we've grown in the last 25 years, will be sort of that best case scenario, for everyone globally. They'll look at us as a just sort of the city that's really kind of done the best job at putting aside the politics, really focusing on what's really important to its residents, and if we can depoliticize a lot of things, the city's going to have a lot of success, and I hope to be around, at least maybe as a spectator, to kind of see it come.
Well, that's awesome. Well, here's my last question for you here, but this is Empower 305, and in your capacity, what have you been able to do? How have you been able to empower your staff, all of our employees, our city residents, especially during these strange times with COVID and all the variants going around? So
this is probably one of the most difficult aspects of this job, and that immediate transition to dealing with a pandemic, is that it didn't afford me, especially in the first year and a half, the opportunity to really connect, especially with the workforce in the city, as I really would have hoped, because we're all working remotely. We had our administration building really shut down, so all the interaction was on a virtual platform. It's just not the same, right? You can't connect with people and build relationships and build chemistry through a digital platform. So for me, that was one of the biggest challenges. I'm now starting to get that opportunity to sort of reconnect with the employees, which for me is what makes the job great, right? It's people. If you ask anybody that's in a leadership role, what they really enjoy about their job, it's the people they work with, right? And leading and really putting everybody in a position, to use a sports analogy, everybody in a position to be successful, right? Whether it's, it really applies, whether it's a government entity, a private corporation, a sports team. You're really trying to create an environment where everybody on the team, right, is been given everything they need to be successful, right? It's hard to do in government because we have a lot of limitations. Things move a lot slower because we have a significant bureaucratic process that is just innate to what we do. But I try to tell people, and I have an interesting little story that I'll kind of leave you with, that is one of the interesting things. We go through a lot of peaks and valleys in government, right? There are good times. The political forces sort of force that on us. And there's an interesting TV show called Ted Lasso, which I love. It's one of my favorite shows, so well written, and I love the characters in the show, and I love some of the message that sort of gets pushed out by that show. And there's a particular sort of concept. We had a really bad, particularly bad commission meeting, and I'm good at reading people, so I can kind of get the sense of body language of how my senior staff sort of reacts to things that I noticed. Everybody was a little dejected, a little down based after the meeting, and I said, I need you guys to I'm gonna tell you a little story. So in a particular episode of Ted Lasso, the premise of the show is he's a soccer coach, right? I'm coaching a football team in England. But he was an American football coach. He gets hired to go coach an English Premier League team. He has no concept of the game of soccer. He's brought there really to fail. But the guy has this innate, overwhelmingly positive personality and persona, and this aura to him, that he ends up, everybody who was working against him in the beginning of the show, little by little, he sort of chips away. They all fall in love with the guy at the end because he just has this amazing positive perspective on things. And there's a particular scene where he's coaching a player, and he makes a mistake, a young player, and kid's having like a lot of self-confidence issues, right? So he makes a mistake in a game. He's coming off the field, and he calls him out, and he goes, hey, so and so. He goes, yeah, coach. He goes, you know what the happiest animal on earth is? And the guy goes, no, coach, I don't. He goes, a goldfish. He kind of looks at him funny. He goes, he has a 10-second memory. Be a goldfish. So the message is, look, you're going to have things that happen, roadblocks put in front of you, pitfalls you're going to have to deal with, and if you dwell on them and you let them consume you, it impacts everything else you're trying to do, right? Anything you're trying to move forward on. So my message to them was, hey, look, just, sometimes you just got to let that go, right? Park it, learn from it, but let it go, and then focus on the stuff that's ahead of you. And that's hard for us to do as human beings. So I bought them all shirts and it said be a goldfish on them. So every time they go in their closet, they can remind them to, as much as you can, be a goldfish.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, sir, I got to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and giving us a better understanding of what it is that you do, how you empower people. And we certainly hope that you'll join us for future episodes of Empower 305.
Without a doubt, looking forward to it.
And before we go, I definitely have to say and let everybody know that today is your birthday. So
It is my birthday.
Happy birthday to you,
Thank
sir.
you very much. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
I feel every bit my age today for some reason. So.
Now, I just want to thank everyone who's behind the scenes before we go on this podcast to help make this possible. On the technical side, we have Louis Castillo. I want to thank our new production manager, George Celino, and our director of communications, Stephanie Severino. I also want to thank you guys, the listeners, for sticking with us on this very first episode here at the City of Miami, Empower 305. And we truly are blessed and thankful to have you here. But we do need your help. So please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Empower 305.
So if I can, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my wife and my kids who, many times sort of also make that sacrifice with me. Just the hours. It's very rare that I have a lot of downtime. I try to really focus on that as much as I can, but it's hard in this job sometimes. Sometimes your weekends aren't really as much of a disconnect as you want it to be, and they make a lot of sacrifices too, and I really do, especially my wife, I really do appreciate sometimes it's frustrating for her, but she's been a tremendous support to me, and I couldn't do this without her either. So
that's awesome.
Shout out to you, Michelle.
Well, thanks again, sir. And like I said, folks, please help us out. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Believe us, your support is everything. So it's time for me to sign off. I'm David Janot, and I hope you'll join us next time on Empower 305.